both.
You come in a bit more. There you go. Okay. Yeah, you're on both.
Alexandria Jackson, take one, marker.
Alexandria, thank you
Thank you.
for doing the interview. Please tell us your name.
My name is Alexandria Jackson, and I am Maynard and Valerie Jackson's daughter. I am the baby of 5.
As you saw me ask your sister an anecdote, something funny, something humorous about your dad that you remember.
I actually remember a lot of funny moments from my father. He thought he was one of the funniest people you could meet. And even if what he said wasn't necessarily the funniest thing, you believed him by how he actually performed his jokes. So one of my favorites that I actually repeat to people all the time, my father said the 2 key things to a successful marriage are yes, dear, and separate bathrooms. And every time he said that joke, he laughed like it was the first time he ever said it. And people laughed like it was the first time they ever heard it. So I actually now say that to people, and my husband agrees, and we follow that rule, and it's fabulous. So thank you, Dad. I will never forget that. It was wonderful.
He's right.
He's right.
Exactly right. I can attest to it. What were the pros and cons of being the daughter of Maynard Jackson?
Pros and cons of being Maynard Jackson's daughter, as I called him Daddy, so Daddy's daughter. I would say the pros far outweighed the cons, but the cons were larger. The pros were that we were blessed to have a phenomenal life. We had access to things that many people and many young people don't have access to. And at the time, I didn't understand that that was indeed a privilege. I was quite young when my father was not in office, so I don't remember that time so well. But when he went in for his 3rd term, I was around 5 or 6, and that's when my memories started to pick up. So what I remember of my father when I was a young child was him being mayor and us having a life with him as mayor and pulling right up to the plane at the airport when we had to go somewhere and having security guards drive me to school and not knowing that that wasn't the norm. And I get out and I say, bye, McCord, and bye, Jackson, bye, Barbara, and I run off and they pick me up at 3 o'clock if my mother or father couldn't be there. So when he left office, there was a lot of, what, that's where the plane is. Why are we still driving to the, and, my parents, oh, baby, we're going inside the airport now. So there was a lot of a learning curve that I had to do. But overall, I would say the major con would be just sharing him with everybody. I was the baby, so some people felt that I maybe got a little more attention than some of the other siblings. But I just like to say that he needed to calm me down more, so that's why I got the attention. He nicknamed me Conan. I don't know why. Apparently I climbed everywhere. Who knows? But there is just a lot going on in my childhood that my father, loved to kind of groom me in and, say, just breathe and calm down and listen to your sister and follow her guidance. And, but actually not being able to have dinners out with him without people coming to the table and interrupting, and they meant well, and they'd always start with, Mr. Jackson, Mayor Jackson, I don't mean to interrupt. I know you're with your family, but, and then they'd, go into a 20-minute story, and my father would always listen. He always listened because that was the type of man that he was. He felt blessed and honored that someone was coming to him and saying, you affected my life in a positive manner. So for him to say no would be disrespectful. And that was something that I had to learn was a positive side to him and not a negative side.
Do you remember any specific activity that you did with your dad that stays with you all the time?
I would say two activities that I did with my father that were constant, always stay in my mind. And that's, one of them is driving around the city. And I know he loved to do that with all of his children. But he and I would drive around on Sunday evenings right when dusk was approaching. And he would tell me almost the history of every house that we would pass. So-and-so lived there in 63 to 69, and then they sold it to so-and-so, and then they had children, but then they moved to Baltimore, and then blah, blah, blah. So I started learning a lot about the neighbors and the neighborhoods. He always reminded me that our people are everywhere. It's not just where we live. It's not just this street that we're driving down. It is the entire city. And you need to understand that this entire city is your home and not just the street that you grew up in. So that always sticks with me. And we would always end at Freshen's frozen yogurt. And he'd get the sugar-free Oreo soft serve every time. And if they were out, it was not a good end to our drive.
Did he talk about his grandfather, your great-grandfather, John Wesley Dobbs, and his father? What did he tell you about them?
He spoke a lot about his family in general. His father, Maynard Sr., his grandfather, John Wesley Dobbs. He spoke of the legacy and the history that they left in Atlanta, how hard it was for them to build that legacy when they first came here. How difficult it was for the family when they left Dallas, when my father was about 5 or 6, to move to Atlanta, and his father starting at a new church. It was a period of time that he loved to remember with love. Even though I know a lot of it pained him, he always wanted to paint a picture of everything is for a reason, it all gets better, no matter the hardship that you have to encounter on this journey, look at what can happen. So that was something that I remember very fondly with him.
Did he ever tell you or your sister why it was important for him to be a mayor? What was his calling? What was his mission?
I believe my father felt he had many callings and many missions. Mayor was the way that he was able to affect the most people at one time. But I do remember sometimes he would question if he missed a calling by not going to the pulpit and following his father and grandfather's legacies. I think that sometimes when he was at a low point, he would remember his time in the church. And that is what helped drive him, pick him back up. And that was when he would feel an even bigger pull to the church. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he knew that he was where he should have been at the time that he was, for the time that he was.
Good. Well, you were young, but did you understand, or how did you react when your dad decided not to run for a 4th term as mayor? You probably were 7 or 8 or something?
I was, when he decided to not run, I was about 9. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how our lives would change. The way that he explained it to me was, I'll be around a lot more. So for me, I said, awesome. Can we still drive up to the plane? It didn't make a huge difference to me. I didn't remember the time when he wasn't mayor. So I was confused about what it meant. I didn't know if we had to leave our home. I didn't know if we were in a mayor's house. I didn't know if we had to leave Atlanta. I didn't know if I had to change schools. But when they told me, you know, life will go on as is, and the difference is we have, you know, we drive ourselves and we have more time together and we have those Sunday drives a little more. So he sold me with that. I was fine.
Right. So what was it like after he was no longer mayor and you had more time with your dad and he was at home more? Or was he at home more?
He was at home more. I got to know him a lot better. There is a very large age gap between my father and myself. So there was a lot of generational differences. And I've been told, and as I've gotten older, I agree, that I am very much like my father in terms of our personalities, our emotions are both very sensitive and can be very hard-headed. So not a great combination sometimes. Your feelings can get hurt and you don't know what to do about it. So I learned communication with my father. I was a preteen. I was a girl. He was patient and wanted to be there to help me in whatever I needed to know growing up. And if he couldn't do something or tell me something, my mother was right there to back him up. But I would say the biggest memory that I have of the transition of him leaving office was him still fighting with that decision and wondering if he should have gone back, if he could have made more of a difference, if there were more people he could have helped. Is he quitting the people of Atlanta? Is he being selfish? And it showed me how selfless he really is and was. But he'd look at me and he'd smile and say, "But I have you guys." He said, and that's the most important thing in the world.
He was different. He was dealing with some health issues at that time too. Yeah.
He had a lot of health issues. That is something I remember that was consistent through my childhood. But he never really let on to how serious it was at one moment. He always had a smile on his face. Every time I come down in the morning, he'd brighten up. "Hey, sweetie pie, give me some sugar." Every time. He could have been on the way to the hospital for all I know, but he greeted me with love. So I know it was a hard balance for him.
The day he passed, where were you?
The day my father passed away, I was taking summer school at Georgia State. I was home from University of Miami and wanted to take some extra classes that were right across from his old office building, the Echo building. And I was in a very large lecture hall, and I was at the very top, and I was actually wearing one of my father's old Morehouse college sweatshirts. And for some reason, I had turned my phone off that day, and I never turn my phone off. And apparently people had found out that he passed before I did, and they'd been trying to reach me and find me. And a police officer and a young lady came into the lecture hall and told the professor, "We need to speak with one of your students." And the lady said, "There she is up there," and pointed to me. And I immediately started thinking, do I have tickets? Did I park illegally? Did I do something wrong? And they brought me down and took me into a little hallway. And the lady had worked for my father, and she said, "Alexandria, your father had a heart attack, and we need to get you upstairs to his office." And that was all she said. So I immediately thought, well, where is he? Is he breathing yet? What hospital is he in? When can I go see him? And she said, we have to take you up the back because the media has already gotten to the front of the building. And that started to worry me. So they took me up a service elevator. And I walked into his office and everyone was like statues. And his executive assistant, whom I've known since I was a baby, and she literally was his right hand, arm, side, everything, was there. And she took me aside into a private room and she said, Alex, your father had a heart attack and he didn't make it. And I just started howling and fell down on the floor, and we just held each other. And an old security guard who worked with us when I was a child had heard on the radio, and he came and found me and said, I want to take you home. So he took me home and he turned the radio off because it was the first thing we heard when we got in the car. And my sister, Valerie Amanda, greeted me at the driveway with task on her face and in her mind. And she said, let's walk to the back. We're going to take you inside. The cameras are rolling. Just be aware of that. And I went upstairs and watched I Love Lucy for days. That's all I could handle.
Daphne, what's the question?
Thank you.
I have,
Thank you very much.
yeah. So you kind of touched on this. You were saying that you're like your father. I love the Conan name. So, you know, when someone's your dad, as we all know, is larger than life, he had a strong voice, but he was a sensitive person. Do you ever recall, because when people see, especially men, and they're large, they automatically assume they can handle anything, but apparently your father was sensitive. Had you ever seen him cry?
You should talk to me.
Okay. I saw my father cry many times. Many times, actually. He was very emotional. He took things to heart. If he felt he let anyone down, if he felt he could have done more, he could have saved 1,000 people, but could he have saved 1,001? That was his outlook on life. He loved his family. His mother was his heart. All of his children, he just adored. My mother, every time he looked at her, it was like, I would imagine the first time he ever saw her. And he's just a big teddy bear. So it was not odd for me to see this large man cry, because that is what I knew to be my father. But he would always explain to me why he was crying, why he was being emotional, what he was learning from that moment, and what I could potentially learn from this moment. So it was a very vulnerable moment for him, but he always turned it into a teaching moment.
You have one, Daphne?
And the second question, well, maybe that's the last question.
Tell us about you were the first female football player in private school. So tell us about the time when you came home and told your dad that you wanted to play football. And his reaction to
I remember that.
That's it. I'll answer that question last.
Okay.
One day in 7th grade, I was in geography class, and a lot of the boys were talking about trying out for the football team at my school. And I had always loved football. I watched it every weekend with my dad if he was home. And I asked, well, has a girl ever played? Are they allowed? And they all went, I don't know, but who would? We don't care. I don't need to know that. So I asked the teacher, who was one of the coaches, and he said, well, they're allowed, but no one has. And I immediately went, So I came home and I said, Daddy, with a smile, blink, blink, I'd like to play football. And he said, powder puff or flag football? You want to find a league, a girls' league? I said, no, I want to play at Lovett. And they allow girls, and the tryouts are next week. And he looked at me and smiled and said, absolutely not. And I said, but they're allowed. And you always told me if I want something, I should go out and get it and never let fear hold me back and find your passion and cultivate it. And the whole time I'm telling this to him, you could just see on his face like, darn it, why did I instill that on her? And he did not like it. And my mother took him to what they call the splainin' room. And by the time they came out, my father said, sweetheart, we're behind you 100%. And he said, but you have to promise me it'll only be for 1 year. Because once you get past the middle school, the boys get bigger, they hit harder. And he said, no, I don't want to, have to think about that. So I promised. And after the first week, I didn't even want to do it anymore. I finished, but I didn't want to do it. I said, you don't have to worry about me going past a year, Dad. I got you, no problem.
What was your position?
I was tackle.
You were a tackle?
I was offensive and defensive tackle. And I wore number 70, just like my dad did, for his half a semester of football at Morehouse, I think it was.
What is your dad's legacy?
I would say my father's legacy is love. A lot can be said that's very specific. A lot can be said that's very academic, full of points and dates and accomplishments. But bottom line, my father wanted everyone to interact with love equally, no matter the race, gender, sexual preference, did not matter to him. He felt everyone was equal. No one was better than him. He was not better than anyone. And he taught that to us and made sure that we understood it doesn't matter if you interact with Mr. Man who's living on the side of the street or Mr. Man who's sitting in the Oval Office. You treat both of them with respect. So I'd say love and respect are his legacies.
Daphne, last one? Your last one?
So, if you had the opportunity to say something to your father, that you maybe didn't have the chance to before, what would that be? You can say it today.
If there's one thing I could say to my father that I didn't have a chance to say, I think if you had asked me that question 5-10 years ago, I would have said I wanted to say goodbye. I think I was one of the only people who didn't get to see him within the past couple of days before he passed away. But I believe that was for a reason, because he didn't want me to say goodbye. And he wanted me to always feel that he was with me. I love him, but he knew that. And I say it every day.
Leslie, you got anything? Wendy, anything else?
Yeah, I have a little something. So, you know, you talked about the Sunday evening drives, and this really just put if I could fit another notch in his cap, and I've stuck another one in there because he made it a point, as you referenced, to come over and scoop me up for the Sunday afternoon drives. So he literally dedicated all of Sunday to his family. But more specifically, my question is, did he, and I'm sure he did, so talk about how, talk about how he referenced, I guess that would be your great grandfather Alex, your namesake, Alexander Jackson, because we hear John Wesley Dobbs in these stories so much. But I just want you to reflect on
Alexander Stevens.
Did he ever give you any stories of the things he instilled in you? Did he ever reflect on the things that were instilled in him on the preacher side, as far as that lineage, that Alexander Jackson, Maynard Jackson? Could you reflect on that a little bit?
Sure. My great-great-grandfather is Alexander Stevens Jackson, and I remember growing up with a very large picture of him in our basement. Now, as you can tell, I am quite light-skinned, and he seemed lighter than me. So I grew up wondering, who is this white man on our wall in our basement? And my father would always say that picture of your great-grandfather, Alexander Stevens, downstairs. And I said, but where is this picture he keeps talking about? And he one day actually sat me down and told me my namesake, Alexander Stevens Jackson, because apparently my mother convinced my father that she thought I was going to be a boy because I kicked her so hard. So they were going to name me Alexander. And when out popped a girl, they said, Alexandra. It's what we had planned all along. So I actually got a chance to visit Grandpa Stevens' church in Dallas a couple of months ago. And I met with the current pastor, and he brought me into the pastor's room, and they had pictures of all the previous pastors. And Alexander Stevens was right next to Maynard Jackson Sr. And it was the same picture I remembered from our basement. And they had us take a picture with me standing directly underneath the two of their pictures. And the ladies in the office could not stop gasping. They said, "You're him, you're him." And I thought they meant Maynard Sr. because everyone tells me I look just like my father. They said, "No, you're Alexander Stevens. You're Papa Stevens, Papa Jackson." They said, "Oh, it's just uncanny." And it was the first time I really was able to get a connection to him through other people. So that was a really incredible moment to see that and to learn the history of his church, and then them migrating from Dallas to Atlanta.
Wow, the other side of the family.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, indeed.
Good, good. Anything else?
Awesome. That did it.
All right. Room tone.
No moving?